What's up YouTube, and welcome back to Homebrew Subaru. I had a couple issues with the car this last week, and I think what I'm going to do in this video is just kind of throw in those clips of what I was doing and then set up the camera and we're going to go for a little drive down the highway. Basically in the beginning of the week I started to try and diagnose more of the drivability. I was getting a lot of stuttering and bucking and the fuel mileage is like terrible. So I started to think there's something going on with the map sensor reading, and that's basically what I chased after first. So I've spent quite a bit of time just trying to troubleshoot things in my mind before coming to the vehicle to attack it. And something I think may be an issue is how I'm picking up the vacuum signal for the map sensor. So looking here on the throttle body, you can see this open port, those two threaded holes. That's where the factory map sensor is actually supposed to be positioned. But because I've been tricking the map sensor by blowing off excess pressure with these relief valves, which are just basically aquarium valves, and the map sensor is located down here, I think I have a leak generated here. To give you a better idea of how I turned that from a female port into a male port so that I could run hose off of it to the map sensor, I basically made up just a little piece of bracket and used a vacuum coupler with some O-rings on the end of it, dipped down into that hole, and then the little wings that are on the ends of the vacuum port literally being held down into place, even though the O-rings were doing a very good job of actually retaining it in there. So I decided to pull all that apart, and looking at the O-rings that I had on the end of this, the first one looks very deteriorated. It looks like it's missing a good couple chunks out of one side of it. These are very small O-rings. There's even a little tear in this one. I have a feeling that I'm getting a vacuum leak right at these O-rings, which would throw off the map sensor completely because it's literally picking up its reference point where these would be leaking. Now this is another one of my jerry-rigged homemade deals, and all I'm planning on doing is seating some new O-rings on there with a little tiny slick of grease, getting it all back together, and seeing if it affects my idle and drivability at all. Now after getting that back together and going for a few drives, the car drove a lot better. There was no more bucking, no more real hesitation anywhere, but the idle's still low and still running rich. So I just kind of continued to drive it over the next couple days, but having a lot more power. I kind of gave it a good blast on the highway coming home one night, and the exhaust got really loud. I don't know why, but basically the mid pipe came apart. One bolt was missing. There was one bolt still hanging on but loose. There's no gasket in there, so I don't know if I didn't put a gasket. I mean, I don't think the gasket would have burned out, so maybe I just kind of put the pipe on and then like temporary tightened it up when I initially put the engine in last year. But to go all, like, I've driven like, I don't know, 350 kilometers on the car rate. I don't think, maybe it's just rattled loose from the way it was running and bucking and shaking around, and it actually vibrated loose. But I got that all tightened back up, and the next following day coming home from work, this happened. So I will say that luck seems to keep on slapping me in the face with this car, but I got home tonight and noticed a little bit of smoke coming up from underneath the hood. I've gotten underneath. The crank seal's leaking. This oil pump is an eBay oil pump that I bought. It's a 10mm pump. It was actually a replacement for the first pump that I got from the seller that was defective and had the oil pressure, the oil relief valve in it, basically pinned so that it shot oil pressure like the moon and spit oil out of the oil filter. Well, they sent me a replacement oil pump and I just never used it. I kept it on the shelf, and I put it on this engine before putting it into this car. And I even thought to myself, should I just change the seal in it, because it's probably one of these cheap seals. And so I kind of went through a box of parts that I have. I actually do have a replacement crank seal. I double checked the part number. It's good to go. It's a good seal in the box. I'll just take the Forester to work tomorrow, and when I get home after work, I'm gonna rip the front of this thing off and get that seal in there. I'm tired of working on this car. So it is the following evening. I've already got a start here. I've got the crank pulley off and the timing covers off. I've kind of had a little feel underneath here. Can definitely feel the oil residue, and it doesn't look like, you know, certainly it's coming from the seal. So it's just a matter of taking the belt, lining up the pulleys and taking the belt off. I'm gonna have to get rid of the tensioner and that idler. I think this cogged pulley needs to come off, and then the belt doesn't seem to have taken any oil, but I kind of feel something there, so I might even give it a quick wash with some soapy water. A bunch of 10 mil bolts to pop that pump off, and then I'll start changing the seal over on the bench. Honestly, having this thing single overhead cam makes it so easy and so fast to take apart. I've already got the oil pump off, and I got to do a little bit more cleanup in here. Tried to get most of the sealant off of there, which I've got a little bit more on this side to get. It's a little bit hard to get in here. And I've already got the pump cleaned up, and I'm just ready to give this a little wipe down with some brake clean and run some of the Ultra Gray on it. You can see how little I've taken off of the access stuff. You really need just so little on here to make it seal. And make sure you pop that O-ring back in. I do have the new seal installed already. The material is obviously way different. This is much harder material, and this soft is nice and soft and supple. I'm gonna run some grease into it and place the silicone on there, let it sit for a little while, and then I'm gonna jam this thing back together. Now that was 2 nights ago, and I did drive the car to work yesterday. I drove it around a little bit last night, and there's no leaks. It's nice and dry. I'm really at the point in diagnosis that I have to chase after fuel pressure and possibly like restriction going back to the tank. That fuel metering unit, there could be a problem with it. It might have collapsed, or the diaphragm's not opening in it anymore. The fuel pressure regulator, I mean, it's always a possibility. So I think I'll spend a little time chasing after that. So I'm finished talking about all the issues that I had this week. I'm gonna mount the camera in the car. We're gonna go for a drive. Okay, we're all ready to go here. Got the camera set up. I've got my mic set up. Looking pretty rich back there. Hopefully the mic doesn't have too much of an issue. There's a little bit of a high-pitched frequency coming out of the stereo, I guess, from the ignition system somehow, because I can hear it change when I rev the engine a little bit. But let's get going here. So we're just going to take a quick little jaunt down the highway and talk about the build a little bit. Start with the engine. Basically, this is a 2013 STI block that I put pistons and rings in with some 2001 Legacy GT NA single overhead cam heads. The intake manifold is from a 99 Impreza 2.2 liter. Oh, we had the cops following us there. And the wiring harness is basically out of my old wagon, which was a 2000 Impreza. The turbo is off a WRX.
The exhaust manifold and up pipe are custom, but they are basically for a WRX. The water pumps for a WRX. The oil cooler was taken from the old WRX engine. Cylinder 4 cooling mod has been performed and basically routed directly into that water pump. The oil pump that I just put in is a 10mm oil pump for STIs. The oil pan that I ended up having to use was for a WRX. So I mean, there's a bunch of mixed-matched parts there getting this thing together and running. Behind that, we've got the clutch. The clutch, I honestly thought it had a serious problem when I first brought out the car last year. It shuddered and it shuddered and shook so hard that I thought there was something wrong with the mating surface. I knew that I torqued up everything properly, so I just expected, well, maybe there is a real break-in on this clutch. It's a stage 2. I can't remember exactly what the brand of it is, but I did buy it off eBay for cheap. It was rated for like, I don't know, over 300 foot-pounds of torque anyway. So as I drove the car a little bit more and more, I've noticed the clutch has smoothened right out. It's evened out a lot. It's still ultra aggressive. So somewhere in between my last clutch and my buddy's GTR, I guess. It takes a lot of finessing to get the clutch to engage softly. It's twice as hard as what's in the Forester. I got in the Forester the other day and almost shoved the pedal right through the floor. Now the transmission has been awesome. I've not felt a single issue out of it. I haven't heard a single problem out of it. And the fluid that came out made me a little bit worried, I guess. The same with the differential. I don't know if they're original to the car, but the car has over 280,000 kilometers on it. It doesn't seem like it was ever really overpowered, but someone shifted it nice and easy. There's no noise in the synchros. Everything grabs up really nice. I'm hoping that I don't have a future problem with it at all. Now I did go looking for a short shifter that I have for this car and couldn't find it anywhere. And then I just actually recently traded a guy for a coolant expansion tank, and he gave me a Cartboy short shifter. So maybe I'll get that installed at some point. Now I must say I'm really enjoying the suspension in the car. It's so much softer than that coilover suspension. I mean, half those coilovers were probably bottomed out, and I mean, it just smashed around, and now it's got a nice comfortable ride. The extra ride height, I don't have to worry about any of these bumps or dips in the highway. I can just drive the car like normal. It's a little easier to get in and out of. I'm getting a little older. There's no reason to have a slammed car anymore. I did actually go ahead and order 2 20mm spacers for the rear struts to try and prop up the rear of the car a little bit. I think it's just it'll look a little better. It'll give a little bit of weight back to the front of the car from the weight that I took off of it. And I guess the weights have changed on the car a lot. So everything from like the STI spoiler to that bar that was in the back here, to the U-frame in the front, to relocating the battery from the front to the rear. There's been a bunch of weight changes in the car. The car does feel a little bit more nimble on the road, and from what I can tell, there's no sense of me putting that U-frame back on this car. The brakes do need another bleeding. I can tell just from the way the pedal feels, giving that second step, I can feel a better application on the brakes, so I know there's a little bit of air left in them. I'm pretty sure it's probably in the front calipers because of how large they are with 4 pistons, but probably go around and do a complete bleeding before I actually take the car back in for alignment. And of course I've got to get those spacers installed before I take it for alignment. Just gonna do a quick little U-turn intersection here. which I believe has something to do with fuel. Get the brakes bled out, take it in for an alignment. Probably clean these windows. I keep saying that I'm going to clean them, but what is that stuff? Yeah, like this thing's going through so much fuel, I can almost watch the needle move. When I come to a stop like that, that's when I see the most fuel coming out of the exhaust. That turbo spool up coming uphill. Just a light little sneeze coming out of it. It feels so good to be driving a turbo Subaru again. I just really like this chassis. I think I do like it more than the GC chassis. It just feels that much more solid and that much more planted onto the road. Especially with these 245s, I mean, I'm like glued to the highway. So I guess that's kind of gonna do it for this video. I don't really have anything planned for the next video, but I do have more parts coming in. I'm gonna get a start on this Forester. I'm kind of planning on to order the parts for it this weekend, or a lot of them, and then I can start to think about making videos for that thing. So I guess, yeah, if you like this video, definitely give it a thumbs up, and if you're new here and you haven't already, please consider hitting that subscribe button for me. Leave your questions and comments further down below.